At 2:17, the corridor camera outside the restricted wing resumed after a 6-minute blackout. I noticed the timecode jump before anything else. The lens angle was unchanged, yet a wooden pull toy sat beneath the fire sign where nothing should be stored. I stopped walking. The logbook showed no entry, no escort request. Silence pressed in. If the feed failed, someone wanted it unseen. The guard stopped beneath the camera housing and looked up, not directly, but with the practiced angle that avoided glare. The red standby light was steady now, unremarkable, as if it had never failed. Yet the timecode told a different story. 6 minutes missing, not corrupted, absent. He felt the cold of the stone floor through the soles of his boots, the corridor holding its breath around him. He stepped back to the terminal and keyed in his clearance. The log loaded slowly, lines of movement in tight green text. Deliveries, routine patrols. A staff escort logged out at 1:41. Then nothing until 2:18, when the system resumed its automatic sweep. No override request, no maintenance flag. The absence was clean in a way that unsettled him. He checked again, refining the window. The blackout aligned precisely with the auxiliary door at the end of the corridor, restricted wing C. That door required 2 authorizations after midnight, one physical, one digital. Both should have left a trace. Neither had. The guard's fingers hovered, then continued. He accessed the system diagnostics, a level most patrol officers never touched. The interface shifted, less forgiving, all timestamps and power states. There it was, a manual interruption command issued locally, not remotely. The source terminal was listed only as internal node, no name attached. He exhaled once through his nose. A fault would have been easier. Faults were impersonal. This was deliberate. A soft sound drew his attention back to the corridor. The hum of ventilation, constant but uneven, carrying a faint scent of polish and old wood, and beneath the fire sign, half shadowed by the molding, the small wooden pull toy rested on its side, painted blue, one wheel chipped. He knew it immediately. The recognition was involuntary, a tightening behind the eyes. The toy belonged to the younger royal assigned to the East Nursery, movement restricted after evening hours, always escorted, always logged. The child had been ill earlier that week, no discretionary walks, no exceptions. The guard did not touch it yet. He scanned the corridor first, the doors, the corners, the ceiling. Everything else was correct, too correct. The silence pressed closer, the kind that followed a held command. He knelt, bringing himself level with the toy. The string was slightly damp, darkened near the knot, not fresh moisture, earlier. He stood again and looked back at the camera. The lens covered this stretch fully. Whatever happened here, the system had been made not to see it. His radio crackled once, then settled. Routine check-in approaching. He had seconds to decide how to frame what he had found. Words mattered. Sequence mattered. He glanced at the log terminal again, at the empty space where an entry should have been. Protocol required immediate reporting of any unlogged access attempt. Protocol also assumed the system itself had not been quietly instructed to look away. He lifted the toy carefully, holding it by the body, avoiding the string. The weight was negligible, but the responsibility was not. As he straightened, footsteps echoed faintly somewhere beyond the junction, another patrol, distant, unaware. He turned toward the terminal, the toy hidden against his side, and began drafting an incident note that said only what could be proven. Timecode discrepancy, manual override detected, physical object recovered. He paused before submitting it, the cursor blinking patiently. Something had moved through the restricted wing without permission, and the system had complied. The guard stood alone in the corridor, aware that once the report was filed, the minute would no longer be unlogged, but neither would it be simple. He submitted the report. The confirmation chime was subdued, almost apologetic. The entry locked itself, time-stamped and immutable. He watched the screen for a moment longer than necessary, then closed the terminal. Procedure restored order, at least on paper. The corridor did not feel ordered. The guard moved to the auxiliary door at the end of the hall. Its surface was unmarked, the brass handle polished daily. He did not try it. Accessing the restricted wing without a second authorization would create a new breach, one that would shift attention away from the first. Instead, he examined the seal, intact, no visible tampering. Whatever entry had occurred, it had been clean, approved at the door, even if not on the record. His radio came alive again, this time with his call sign. He acknowledged, voice even, and confirmed routine patrol status, no deviation noted. The words tasted flat, but they were accurate enough to pass. He returned to the camera housing with a small inspection torch, angling the beam along the casing. No scratches, no residue. The access panel was flush. If someone had opened it, they had done so with the correct tools and the confidence of belonging. That, more than anything, narrowed the field. The guard noted the ambient temperature, slightly warmer near the restricted wing, a consequence of older climate controls. The warmth carried with it a faint smell of lavender cleaner, recently applied. Night staff used it sparingly, usually only after scheduled movements. There had been no scheduled movements. He logged the sensory details privately, not in the system. Memory mattered when records failed. When the other patrol passed through minutes later, they exchanged the brief nod of professionals, sharing a space but not a story. The guard did not mention the toy. He had secured it in an evidence sleeve from his kit, labeled and sealed. That too was within protocol, though rarely used for something so small. At the end of his circuit, he delivered the sleeve to the interim secure locker, signing it in under his own name. It would raise questions later. He accepted that. Better a question than an absence. Back in the control room, he reviewed the report as it appeared in the central queue. Already a supervisor tag had been added, under review. No urgency marker, no escalation, yet. He leaned back in the chair, listening to the layered sounds of the palace at night, the distant clock, the muted exchange of guards changing posts, the constant electrical whisper of systems designed to watch without being seen. He considered the child's schedule, the assigned staff, and the narrow window the blackout represented. 6 minutes was enough time to enter, to speak, to leave something behind, or to take something away. A message arrived on the internal channel, brief and formal. Stand by. Do not pursue independently. Further instructions to follow. He read it twice, then acknowledged receipt. The guard remained at his station, posture unchanged, hands folded loosely. Outwardly, nothing had altered. Internally, the minute replayed itself, unlogged, but no longer unnoticed. He understood that from this point forward, every action would be measured against restraint as much as duty. The system clock advanced, indifferent. Somewhere beyond the walls of the control room, the restricted wing held its quiet, and the absence at 0217 waited to be explained or contained. By the time the guard returned to the corridor, the palace had shifted into its pre-dawn rhythm. Lights dimmed automatically, lowering to their night profile. The silence thinned, not gone, but threaded now with distant movement. A service trolley somewhere below, a door closing 2 floors away. Routine reasserting itself. He stopped at the marked threshold where unrestricted access ended. The floor pattern changed subtly here, stone giving way to an older cut, scenes less precise. Restricted Wing C began without ceremony, as if discretion itself were part of its defense. He activated the corridor lockdown protocol. The process was methodical and deliberately slow. Magnetic seals engaged along secondary doors. Indicator lights shifted from green to amber. No alarms, no audible alerts. This was containment, not response. Anyone authorized would feel only a slight resistance if they tried to pass. Anyone unauthorized would not go far. The guard logged the lockdown under Environmental Irregularity Review, a category broad enough to avoid attention, yet legitimate enough to stand. He chose his language carefully. No mention of the toy, no speculation, only actions taken. He walked the corridor again, this time with purpose. The fire sign cast a dull red wash over the wall where the toy had been. The absence was noticeable now that he knew to look for it. He crouched and examined the floor. A faint scuff, barely perceptible unless you knew where to kneel. Small shoes dragged, not lifted. A pause here, then movement toward the restricted door. He rose slowly. Children did not move like that when escorted. Protocol required he secure any personal items found in restricted zones. He had already done so. Protocol also required notifying the child's assigned detail. He did not yet. That notification would trigger questions he could not answer and movement he could not control. Instead, he requested a routine corridor integrity check from facilities, citing climate inconsistency. It was a common enough request. The response came back automated, technician scheduled for 5:30. Too late to interfere with the night, early enough to seem coincidental. He adjusted his patrol route to include a longer pause near the restricted wing entrance. From there he could observe without appearing to watch. The door remained closed. No traffic, no indication of disturbance. The palace was adept at hiding its disruptions. At 4:12, his supervisor entered the control room briefly, reviewed the incident queue, and left without comment. The guard noted the lack of instruction. Silence again, but this time institutional. As the hour approached for staff rotation, the guard faced the second part of procedure, physical verification. Restricted Wing C housed offices, archives, and a short connecting passage to the east nursery level, sealed after 21, except under escort. He requested temporary access clearance for a structural walkthrough. The system approved it automatically. Seniority carried weight. The door released with a soft mechanical sigh. Cooler air spilled out, carrying the scent of old paper and disinfectant. He stepped inside and let the door close behind him. Inside the restricted wing, sound behaved differently. Footsteps did not echo, they settled. The guard moved slowly, counting doors, noting seal indicators. All were intact. Too intact. If someone had passed through, they had done so without haste, without force. He paused at the junction where the passage narrowed toward the nursery connection. A motion sensor overhead blinked once as it registered him, then returned to Inside the restricted wing, sound behaved differently. Footsteps did not echo, they settled. The guard moved slowly, counting doors, noting seal indicators. All were intact. Too intact. If someone had passed through, they had done so without haste, without force. He paused at the junction where the passage narrowed toward the nursery connection. A motion sensor overhead blinked once as it registered him, then returned to steady. He checked the sensor's log via his wrist console. Activation count, 1 additional trigger during the blackout window. Duration, 23 seconds. Enough time to stand still. He did not proceed further. Entering the nursery level now would be a direct violation of standing instruction, even under inspection authority. Instead, he photographed the sensor readout and encrypted the file to his personal archive, tagged and time-stamped. The guard retraced his steps, maintaining the appearance of routine. As he exited, he reset the door and confirmed the lockdown remained active. The corridor outside looked unchanged, but he felt the difference. Procedures had been followed, boxes ticked. Still, something unresolved moved beneath it all. A message came through from Central Security. Maintain lockdown until further notice. No justification provided. That too was procedure adjacent, technically compliant, strategically vague. He acknowledged and resumed his post. At 05:28, facilities arrived early. The technician worked quietly, checking vents, temperature regulators, power feeds. The guard watched without interfering. When asked if anything specific had prompted the request, he answered truthfully but incompletely. A discrepancy in environmental readings. The technician nodded, unconcerned. By the time the shift changed, the corridor was back to normal circulation. Locks disengaged. Amber lights returned to green. To anyone passing through later, nothing would suggest the night had deviated at all. Before handing over, the guard updated his personal notes. He listed times, observations, system responses. He left out conclusions. Those could wait. As he removed his gloves and secured his kit, he felt the pressure begin. Not dramatic, not overt. The pressure of knowing he had done exactly what was required, and still not enough. The palace preferred problems to remain procedural. Children did not fit neatly into that preference. He left the corridor knowing the next step would not come from him alone. The restricted wing had been secured. The toy had been removed. Records existed now. Whatever had happened at 02:17 was contained, but containment was not resolution. And somewhere beyond the locked doors, the child's world continued, altered in ways the system had yet not learned to name. The archive room sat 2 levels below the main security floor, windowless and cold by design. The guards signed in using secondary credentials, the kind issued to personnel trusted not to linger. Fluorescent strips flickered once before stabilizing, casting a pale, even light over rows of terminals and sealed server cabinets. The air smelled faintly of dust and coolant. He selected a station at the far end, away from the central monitoring desk. Officially, he was there to verify system integrity following the reported irregularity. That was accurate. It was also incomplete. The primary corridor feed had already been reviewed and marked as compromised during the 6-minute window. That alone would normally conclude the matter, pending a technical report. But the palace systems were layered, built over decades of incremental upgrades. Where one camera failed, another often remained, installed for redundancy, forgotten by all but those who knew where to look. He accessed the auxiliary index, bypassing the standard interface. The list populated slowly. Maintenance cameras, fire safety feeds, environmental monitors. Most recorded still frames at intervals, not continuous footage. He filtered by location and time. There it was, an auxiliary camera mounted high in the corner of a storage alcove adjoining restricted wing C. Installed years earlier to monitor humidity levels near archived documents, it was never meant to watch people. The footage loaded without ceremony, grainy, fixed angle, no audio. At 02:14, the corridor was empty. At 02:16, a shadow crossed the far edge of the frame, not enough to identify, but enough to register movement. At 02:17, the lighting shifted slightly as the restricted door opened out of frame. The camera did not capture the door itself, only the spill of warmer light and the change in shadow geometry. Then a figure stepped partially into view. The guard leaned forward, elbows on the desk, careful not to touch the screen. The figure wore palace staff attire, indistinct in the low resolution, no visible insignia, no escort. The posture was upright, unhurried, familiar with the space. The figure paused. 23 seconds, the sensor log had said. Here it translated into stillness. The person bent slightly, as if addressing someone shorter, someone not visible to the camera. The guard watched the movement again, frame by frame. There was no suddenness, no struggle, just a measured lean, a hand lowering out of view. At 02:18, the corridor lights returned to their normal state. The restricted door figure straightened and stepped back out of frame. The feed continued, once more empty. He replayed the sequence twice, then a third time, slowing it further. The angle never revealed a face. The clothing could have belonged to any number of authorized personnel. That, he understood, was the point. He exported the clip to a secure drive, encrypting it with a classification that required dual authorization to open. His own credentials would suffice for now. Later they might not. As he prepared the report, his supervisor's voice carried faintly from the central desk, speaking with someone from technical services. The tone was neutral, efficient. The guard did not look up. The system timestamp confirmed what he already knew. The auxiliary camera had not been affected by the blackout. It had not been instructed to look away. It had simply been overlooked. He attached the clip to an addendum and marked it Supplementary Visual Record. Still restrained, still procedural, but the implications were no longer abstract. Before submitting, he hesitated. Once logged, the footage would enter the same system that had allowed the blackout. Escalation would follow, but so would containment. Decisions would be made above his reach. He saved the file locally instead, locking the terminal and stepping back from the desk. He needed to consider sequence, not what was right in principle, but what would protect the child in practice. The archive room hummed softly around him, indifferent. Somewhere above, the palace was awakening. He returned to the footage after a brief interval, this time focusing on what was not present. No escort badge, no accompanying movement, no recorded exit through adjacent corridors. The figure had come and gone within the blackout window, using access that left no trace beyond the auxiliary camera's narrow view. The guard cross-referenced staff schedules, a task technically outside his remit but accessible through layered permissions. Several names populated the list: night clerks, senior aides, a small number of authorized supervisors. Too many to isolate, too few to be comfortable. He noted one detail that had escaped him before: the figure's shoes, plain, dark, soft-soled. Not regulation footwear for guards, likely administrative, quiet by choice. A notification appeared on his screen, interrupting the review. Directive from Central Security, all independent analysis to cease pending formal review, effective immediately. He closed the footage window without responding. The pressure he had anticipated was arriving, not as force, but as narrowing space. options closing one by one. He understood the structure well enough to know that once a formal review began, the narrative would be shaped quickly, efficiently. An explanation would be found that required minimal disruption. He gathered his materials, notes, timestamps, the encrypted drive, and secured them in his locker, logging the action as personal equipment. That too was permissible. Before leaving the archive room, he filed a brief compliance acknowledgement, confirming receipt of the directive. No more, no less. Back on the main floor, the atmosphere had changed. Day staff moved through the corridors, voices low but present. The palace presented its public face with practiced ease. The guard took his position near the control desk, outwardly unchanged. His supervisor approached him mid-morning, posture relaxed. "We've got it from here," she said, quietly. "Technical will handle the footage." He nodded. Understood. She paused, then added, "You did what you were supposed to." It was not reassurance, it was closure. As she walked away, the guard felt the weight of the unasked question settle. What he was supposed to do and what needed to be done were diverging paths. He glanced at the corridor monitor. Restricted Wing C appeared as it always had, still, orderly, unremarkable. No sign of the night's irregularity remained on the surface. Yet the image of the figure bending slightly, the unseen presence just out of frame, remained fixed in his mind. The footage did not show harm. It did not show permission either. By early afternoon, the formal review notice circulated. Access restrictions tightened. Information flow narrowed. The system was closing ranks. The guard accepted his assignment for the next rotation without comment. It placed him near the east nursery level, coincidental on paper, deliberate in reality. He adjusted his uniform, checked his radio, and took his post. The cut footage had not resolved anything. It had sharpened the conflict. He now knew that the system could be bypassed by those who belonged to it, and that the record could be shaped to absorb the shock. As he stood watch, listening to the softened sounds of the nursery corridor beyond the sealed door, he understood that the next decision would not be about evidence. It would be about timing. The directive arrived just after midday, delivered through formal channels and echoed verbally by the duty officer. Effective immediately, all personnel involved in the Restricted Wing review were to refrain from independent movement near sensitive residential areas. Oversight would be centralized, patrol routes adjusted, compliance expected. The guard acknowledged without expression. He had already anticipated it. Restriction followed inquiry as predictably as night followed day. His revised assignment placed him at the eastern junction, 2 corridors removed from the nursery level, close enough to be useful in an emergency, far enough to prevent observation. The positioning was deliberate. He recognized the logic and the intent behind it. He stood at his post as required, posture precise, gaze neutral. Through the stone walls, faint sounds traveled, soft footfalls, a distant voice, the muted rhythm of daily routine resuming its shape. The palace protected itself by normalizing what could not be spoken. At 14:06, he received a secondary instruction, less formal. Stand down from further involvement. The review team would handle all follow-up. His role was concluded. He responded with a single word, acknowledged. The guard waited. Minutes passed, then more. He tracked them without looking at the clock, marking time by the subtle shifts of light along the corridor edge. His instincts did not settle, they sharpened. Every training exercise he had ever completed had emphasized restraint, deference, chain of command. But training also taught recognition when a situation exceeded its paperwork. A staff escort passed, leading a junior aide toward the residential wing. Authorized, logged, correct. Yet the aide's pace faltered briefly near the nursery junction, as if drawn by something unseen. He noted it, nothing more. At 14:31, a routine movement alert appeared on his console. Scheduled welfare check for the younger royal, conducted by assigned staff, standard procedure. The alert closed itself once acknowledged by the system. The guard felt the quiet pressure return, heavier now. Welfare checks were rarely announced unless required. The timing aligned too neatly with the review's containment. He requested clarification from Central Security, framing it as a route optimization query. The response came back curt: no deviation permitted, maintain position. He remained still. The decision did not arrive as a sudden resolve. It formed gradually, shaped by accumulated details: the unlogged minute, the auxiliary footage, the toy placed where it did not belong, the system's swift desire to settle. He did not intend to confront anyone. He did not intend to accuse. He intended to see. At 14:44, he initiated a standard perimeter override, citing perimeter fatigue rotation. The request was automatically approved, the system trusting his seniority and history of compliance. The route adjustment allowed him to pass through the corridor adjoining the nursery level, briefly, indirectly, plausibly. He moved without urgency, no deviation in pace, no outward signal of intent. The corridor grew warmer as he approached, the air carrying the faint scent of soap and clean linen. Sounds softened here, absorbed by fabric and design. A sealed door marked the nursery junction. He did not attempt to open it. Instead, he paused at the observation panel set discreetly into the wall, intended for emergency verification only. Access required a manual key and justification. He removed the key from his belt. Protocol required authorization. Instinct required confirmation. He inserted the key and turned it once. The panel slid open just enough to reveal the corridor beyond. The guard did not lean in. He did not linger. He looked, briefly, professionally. The nursery corridor was quiet. Lights dimmed to their afternoon setting. At the far end, a staff member stood outside one of the rooms, posture attentive but tense. Inside, partially visible through the open door, the child sat on the edge of the bed, feet not reaching the floor, hands folded, still. The guard closed the panel. He stepped back, heart rate unchanged, breath steady. Nothing overt was wrong, nothing that could be cited, and yet the stillness he had seen was not rest, it was withdrawal. He returned the key to his belt and resumed his patrol route, the override window closing behind him. By the time Central Security's system registered his movement, he was already back at his assigned post. A message followed within minutes, inquiry regarding unauthorized access attempt. He responded accurately. No access attempt made, only route adjustment within approved parameters. The log supported him. The system, once again, had complied. His supervisor approached shortly after, expression controlled. "You were told to stand down." "Yes," he said. "You have close to overstepping." "I haven't," he replied. It was not defiance, it was fact. She studied him for a moment longer, then nodded once. "Be careful." As she left, the guard understood the warning for what it was, not a threat, but an acknowledgment of narrowing tolerance. The institution could absorb one irregularity, it would not tolerate a pattern. The rest of the shift passed without incident, no alarms, no raised voices. The welfare check concluded on schedule. The system marked the child as present, unharmed. Yet when the guard was relieved that evening, the image remained with him. A child sitting too still, in a place designed for safety, surrounded by adults who moved carefully around what they would not name. He secured his equipment and logged off duty, outwardly unchanged. Internally, the line had been crossed, not by him, but by circumstance. Protocol had been observed. Instinct had been exercised quietly. The conflict was no longer theoretical. It was now personal, and it was not finished. The guard returned to duty the following morning under a revised roster that placed him on interior circulation rather than fixed post. It was presented as routine redistribution. He recognized it as observation. Mobility allowed oversight without proximity. It also allowed monitoring of those who moved too freely. The nursery level carried a different atmosphere during daylight. Sunlight filtered through high, narrow windows, softened by gauze curtains. The air was warmer here, faintly scented with polish and detergent. Children's sounds, normally light, irregular, were subdued, controlled. He passed the junction twice before being acknowledged. On the third pass, the assigned attendant stepped out, closing the door behind her, deliberately care. She greeted him politely, professionally. Her hands did not stop moving. "Everything in order?" he asked, as regulation allowed. "Yes," she said, too quickly. "Just a quiet morning." He noted the phrasing. Quiet was not the same as settled. He requested entry under welfare verification, a standard provision requiring no escalation if conducted briefly. The attendant hesitated, then complied. The door opened. Inside, the room was orderly to the point of rigidity. Toys aligned, books stacked evenly. The child sat on the floor near the window, back straight, gaze fixed on the light pattern on the rug. No play in progress, no distraction. The guard remained near the threshold. He did not approach. Presence alone could unsettle. He observed instead posture, breathing, hands. The child's fingers moved slowly, tracing the edge of a block without lifting it. No eye contact. "Good morning," he said evenly. No response. The attendant shifted behind him. "They've been like this since yesterday afternoon. The doctor says it's a reaction, nothing physical." The guard nodded. He did not ask which reaction. Labels often replaced understanding. He scanned the room subtly. No visible marks, no displaced objects. Everything appeared correct. Too correct. "Did the child leave the room last night?" The attendant shook her head. "No, not after evening check." The guard did not challenge the answer. He asked instead, "Did anyone else enter?" "Only authorized staff." Again correct without being complete. He watched the child's hand pause, fingers tightening briefly before relaxing, a response to tone, perhaps, or to proximity. The guard shifted his weight slightly, reducing his presence. The movement was slow, deliberate. He waited. Minutes passed without speech. Silence was not empty here. It was active, containing. The child did not look up, but the hand moved again, this time pushing the block an inch away, then stopping. The guard understood. He did not press. He thanked the attendant and stepped back into the corridor. The door closed softly behind him. He logged the visit as routine, noting no physical distress observed. That was true. What he did not log was the absence of engagement, the way silence had settled into the room like a held breath. As he continued his route, he felt the familiar constraint tighten. Nothing he had seen warranted intervention, everything fit within acceptable parameters, yet the unease persisted, sharpened now by proximity. Silence, he knew, was not neutrality. It was often a response. Later that afternoon, the guard encountered the child again, this time incidentally. A scheduled movement required temporary relocation to an adjacent sitting room while maintenance addressed a minor fault. The transfer was brief, supervised, logged. The guard was positioned at the far end of the corridor as the child passed, flanked by 2 attendants. The child walked slowly, gaze downcast, steps measured. Halfway past, the child faltered just enough to break rhythm. The guard did not move. The child's hand lifted slightly, then dropped. Not a wave, not a reach, a hesitation. The attendants did not notice. The guard noted the gesture precisely. He did not respond outwardly. Any reaction could have been interpreted as interference. Instead, he adjusted his stance, angling his body away, creating space rather than attention. As the group continued, the child turned their head briefly, not toward the attendants, but toward the open corridor behind them, toward where the guard stood. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. There was no expression of fear, no plea, just recognition, and beneath it something quieter, expectation withheld. The guard held the gaze without change, calm, neutral, present. The moment passed. The child was guided onward. The corridor returned to its controlled stillness. That evening, the guard reviewed his notes again. He added nothing new. He removed nothing. The record remained sparse, factual. In another system, one not designed to erase nuance, it would have been insufficient. He understood now that the child would not speak, not yet. Silence was safer than language in an environment where words could be reshaped. The system would interpret the absence of complaint as resolution. He would not. As he secured his locker at the end of the shift, he felt the decision solidify, not as defiance, but as alignment. He would wait for the correct moment, the correct channel. Escalation without precision would fail. Protection required patience. The child's silence was not an end state. It was a signal, faint but deliberate. And he had heard it. The guard waited 3 days, not because nothing happened, but because too much did, quietly, administratively, behind doors that closed before he reached them. The review advanced in form, but not in substance. The blackout was a localized systems anomaly. The auxiliary footage was downgraded to non-actionable. The welfare check concluded no safeguarding concern identified. Each phrase was accurate in isolation. Together they formed a narrative that required no further action. He continued his duties without deviation. He logged movements, acknowledged instructions, avoided the nursery level unless directed. Outward compliance was expected. Inward patience was necessary. The opportunity came, as such moments often did, without ceremony. Princess Anne arrived for a scheduled internal briefing, one of several she attended monthly. Her presence altered the palace's rhythm in subtle ways. Corridors cleared more thoroughly, conversations shortened, senior staff alert in a way that was not performative. She was not ceremonial in these settings. She listened. The guard learned of the briefing through the duty roster. Location, Conference Room D, adjacent to the restricted administrative wing. Time, 1600 hours. Attendees, senior palace staff, security oversight, residential operations. Child welfare was listed as a subpoint. He prepared nothing formal. He reviewed his notes once, then closed them. Evidence existed, but evidence alone would be absorbed if not framed correctly. What mattered was sequence, responsibility, and consequence. At 15:42, he requested permission to attend the briefing under security representation. His supervisor hesitated just long enough to register surprise, then approved it. Denial would have required explanation. The conference room was cool, deliberately so. Long table, low lighting, screens dormant. Princess Anne sat at the head, posture straight, hands folded. She acknowledged arrivals with a nod, nothing more. The guard took a seat along the side wall, not at the table. Observational position, appropriate. The briefing progressed efficiently. Technical summaries, procedural reassurances, a clear effort to close the matter without dramatization. When child welfare was addressed, it was brief, language careful, conclusions confident. No questions were invited. The guard waited until Princess Anne spoke again, asking quietly whether there were any unresolved observations. The room paused. No one answered immediately. He stood. He did not look at her first. He addressed the room, voice even, volume controlled. He outlined the sequence, the unlogged minute, the manual override, the auxiliary camera. He did not accuse. He did not speculate. He described. When he finished, he turned to her. "There is footage," he said. "It shows entry into the restricted wing without escort clearance during the blackout." Silence followed. Not shock, but recalibration. Princess Anne did not react immediately. She asked one question. Why was this not included in the formal review? The guard answered truthfully. It was deemed supplementary. She nodded once. "Show me." The footage played on the main screen, grainy, impersonal. The room leaned forward collectively, then stilled. No one spoke as the figure appeared, paused, and exited. Princess Anne watched without interruption. When it ended, she did not ask who the figure was. She did not ask why the child was not visible. She asked instead who had the authority to override the system locally. A senior administrator answered carefully. A limited number of staff. She turned to the guard and the child. The guard kept his response narrow, physically unharmed, behaviorally withdrawn following the incident window. That was enough. Princess Anne stood. The movement was unhurried, decisive. "This briefing is no longer concluded," she said. "I want full access logs, unredacted. I want staff movement reconciled manually, not by system summary. And I want safeguarding present before this room empties." She looked at the senior staff one by one, not accusatory, expectant. Then she addressed the guard again. "You will remain available." "Yes, ma'am." The meeting fractured into motion. Phones raised, documents retrieved, voices lowered. The containment effort collapsed under direct authority, not forcefully, but completely. Procedure adjusted itself around her. Later, in a smaller room, Princess Anne reviewed the auxiliary footage again, this time frame by frame. The guard stood nearby, silent unless addressed. "You did the right thing," she said, not praise, assessment. She ordered an internal inquiry on the spot, access privileges suspended pending review, independent safeguarding officers brought in, not announced, not delayed. By evening, the palace had shifted again, different this time, tighter, watchful in a way that did not seek to disappear the problem. The guard returned to duty under temporary reassignment. His access was restricted along with others. That too was expected. Scrutiny cut both ways. As he passed the nursery corridor that night, he did not look in. He did not need to. The escalation had occurred, not loudly, not publicly, but irrevocably. Protocol had been followed, belatedly, precisely, and the child, somewhere beyond the walls, was no longer alone inside the silence. The inquiry began without announcement. By morning, access privileges across 3 administrative tiers had been suspended. Doors that had once opened without pause now required verification. Staff moved more carefully, voices lowered, routines interrupted just enough to signal consequence. The palace did not acknowledge disruption openly, but it adjusted, subtly, defensively. The guard reported as instructed, surrendering his primary credentials for temporary reissue. The act was procedural, neutral. He signed the form, accepted the replacement badge, and said nothing. Scrutiny, he understood, was not punishment, it was balance. His reassignment placed him on external perimeter rotation, removed from interior circulation, distance without dismissal, a position that allowed visibility without involvement. He accepted it without comment. From the outer grounds, the palace appeared unchanged, stone uninterrupted, flags steady. The appearance of permanence held. Inside, processes unraveled and reformed. He was called once that afternoon to provide a statement, not in an interrogation room, but a modest office near the security annex. 2 safeguarding officers present, a recorder on the table, no adversarial tone. He recounted events in sequence as he always had. He avoided interpretation. He described what he saw, what he logged, what he withheld, and why. When asked about his decision to delay compliance, he answered plainly, "I believed immediate visibility was necessary to prevent further risk." They did not challenge him. When the session ended, he returned to post. The wind had picked up across the grounds, carrying the faint scent of rain. He stood with his back to the wall, scanning the perimeter, doing the work he had always done. No change in posture, no indulgence in outcome. Near dusk, a message came through internal channels. Safeguarding measures enacted, staff rotations adjusted, temporary oversight assigned to the nursery level. The language was restrained, but the implication was clear. The silence had been acknowledged. The guard read the message once, then closed it. As night settled, lights shifted across the palace facade. From his position, he could see the upper windows glow one by one. Somewhere inside, routines were being relearned. He remained outside until relieved. Several days passed before he was returned to interior duty. The delay was intentional, he suspected, not to sideline him, but to allow the system to absorb what had happened without his presence complicating it. When he stepped back inside, the atmosphere had changed again, less defensive now, more precise. Movement logs were enforced visibly, escort protocols tightened, not permanently, perhaps, but meaningfully. He passed the nursery corridor once, assigned to a distant junction. He did not look toward the door. He did not need confirmation. Later that shift, he encountered one of the safeguarding officers in the corridor. They exchanged a nod, nothing more, professional acknowledgement. Near the end of his rotation, his supervisor approached him. Her tone was measured. "The inquiry will take time," she said. "You may not see the outcome." "I understand," he replied. She paused. "Your actions are on record. So is your restraint." That was all. When the guard left the palace that evening, the grounds were quiet. The rain had passed. The air was cool, clean. He paused briefly at the outer gate, not out of reflection but habit, checking lines, noting light, listening. He understood that systems did not change because of one decision. They shifted because of accumulated insistence on attention. What he had done would be absorbed, reframed, perhaps even softened in time, but something essential had been altered. Inside the palace, a child had been seen when silence would have been easier. Authority had been exercised not to protect itself, but to correct its reach. That mattered, even if it would never be named. The guard adjusted his coat and stepped into the night. He would return the next day.